I have some amazing colleagues, Marco Dinovelli, Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management, and Will Jones, Executive Director for Career Exploration and Success. They're going to come and they're going to present together an equity data walk. As we think about progress, being able to think in terms of what does that mean for higher education as it relates to student success. And so you'll hear some data related to undergraduate students, graduate students, and how that's associated with postgraduate outcomes. So if you will welcome them with me with a round of applause as they come to the stage and begin to present. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. We want to address the elephant in the room. Anyone who's wondering, yes, we did plan these outfits. All down to the shoes. So everything from the ties, the color, the shoes, everything, we wanted to make sure that we looked, the parts. You can't even tell us apart up here. But thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Marco Dinovelli. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Enrollment Management. I oversee undergraduate admissions, our fairly new Office of Graduate Admissions, and our Enrollment Analytics team. Will?
And good morning. My name is Will Jones. I am the Executive Director for the Office of Career Exploration and Success. And we work with students all along their career journey from self-discovery all the way through pursuing their goals. Now, it is Access Week, and so one of the things as we look at, as a university, as we look at ways to demolish some of those barriers, data can really come in handy when it comes to identifying where our students are not only going, but where they've been. And so we're going to share with you quite a bit of data today. Data's great. We're going to share quite a bit of data with you today, and then we're also going to have some time at the end for questions as well. But before we start, we do want to thank two of our amazing colleagues within both of our offices who are really responsible for not only collecting the data, but helping to synthesize the data. So from Career Exploration and Success, Madeline Giordano. She is our Senior Assistant Director for Career Outcomes and Assessment, and she oversees our post-graduation survey data collection process.
And from my team, from our Enrollment Management Analytics team, we have Megan Knight, our research analyst. Megan does a lot of work for us, specifically for the admissions process relating to our EOF students, and really everything we can do to try to make that process as simple for them, as well as many other things. And as Will said, two people much smarter than either of us who did all the real hard work, and we just get to come up here and actually do the presentation. So what are we going to cover today? Really, as part of the data walk, one of the things we like to do is case studies. And we like to do those specific to either an entering year for a particular incoming class, so looking specifically here at the undergraduate incoming first year class of 2020. Everyone remembers fall 2020? These students, are our first kids coming in through COVID and everything like that. Very exciting group to look at. After that, we've heard from you from past years when to learn a little bit more about graduate students. So we're going to do a graduate student-specific data walk looking at students who graduated from their graduate program in 2024. So the undergraduate one is students who started in fall 2020. That's a way for us to kind of put them together. The graduate one is looking at the students who graduated in 2024, specifically from graduate programs. After that, we're just going to touch base on some overall rates, kind of just show you some trends in what we're seeing as far as our students and their not only their graduation rates and then career outcomes. But as Will and I said, we have over 50 slides to go through. We're going to go through it quick, but our goal is really to give you time to ask questions at the end. So if you have a question, something pops in your mind, please don't hesitate. One of the things we really like to talk about is Rutgers is such a big place. One data point, such as graduation rates or career outcomes, just one data point for the entire university isn't telling enough of the story. And that's what we're here today to kind of walk through nuances and differences. We have a lot of positive stats, and when you look at these stats, just because one number might not be as high as another, it doesn't mean that number is bad because it's lower compared to national trends or what other universities are doing, but it's important to know that not everything is equal, and everything might come in at different levels for different groups. So you can think about what we can do to try to change things, to try to figure out ways to bring different groups up. With that, we do want to just go over a couple of terms really quickly just to make sure we're all on the same page when you hear things for us. When you see in our reports, you see something that says race, ethnicity, other. This is just students who identified on their application that they are 2 or more races. They did not give us any racial information in their application. They identify a specific islander or Native American. So that's when you see race, ethnicity, other, you're wondering what that means. It's students who identified in any of those particular ways. International is something that can be used in a lot of different ways here at Rutgers. Specifically for this presentation, when we say an international student, we're talking about a student who is not a U.S. citizen and not a U.S. permanent resident. So really someone whose citizenship is broad. If you're a dual citizenship holder with the U.S., you would count as a U.S. citizen, and therefore you would not be considered international. Pell recipient, the Pell program is a federal grant program for the most low-income families here in the U.S., provides funding to these students to attend colleges and universities. It's a fantastic program that we truly hope does not get affected by any of the changes going on in the world today, but that's something that many of our students, as you'll find out here at Rutgers, are Pell recipients, and it really just shows that they do amazing things here for them. Finally, retention rate. This is something I forget that's so common in my world, but might not necessarily be in yours. When we say retention rate, that is a metric for first-year incoming undergraduate students. How many of them, or what percentage of them, come back for their second year? So it's really how many students started with us, got to their first year, and decided, you know what, I'm coming back for year 2. That's what our retention rate is. Well,
And then from a career outcome standpoint, there are so many different ways that you can assess post-graduation success. For the purposes of this presentation, though, we are going to utilize the National Association of Colleges and Employers definition of career outcomes, which includes graduates who are employed, they were accepted into a program of continuing study, or they're participating in some type of volunteerism or military service within 6 months of graduation. So that's how we define post-graduation career outcomes. And then later in the presentation, too, you'll also see some bars that are actually talking about whether or not the activity that the student went into is their first preferred activity.
So now we're going to talk about our first case studies. This is really our first time to do a Datawalk. So again, we're looking at our undergraduate incoming first-year class from fall 2020. So this is September 2020, if you want to close your eyes and think back. We're all remote, we're all working from our homes, and these students, you know, are the first group who are starting their college education completely online, not at our campus. And this was a group that, you know, had to really start their education with us still kind of throwing it together, figuring out what it was going to look like. It's certainly something that we also were trying to figure out, how do we support students in so many different ways in so many different places, knowing that especially many of our students from different low-income backgrounds, do they have the space to do these classes, you know? Do they have the technology? Do they have the Wi-Fi connection? Do they have a computer just for themselves? Really learning about what that's going to look like for so many of our students and what the world would be. So if you take a look here, you know, we'd like to kind of show you guys a little bit just about the class and how they broke down. And this is, you know, all data that is available, you know, through iPads and other places. But, you know, really shows the spectrum here of how our class broke down. Believe it or not, despite everything going on in the world, over 10% of the incoming first-year class that year was international students. We actually did a great program working with our friends at Rutgers Global, where we allowed some of these students to start with online programs in China, because we had you know, a few hundred Chinese students who joined us that year. But if you kind of take a look at it, you kind of see, you know, how it divides. Every year is a little different when it comes to the different, you know, ethnicity breakdowns. You'll see this was actually a year where we had moved up quite a bit in our Latinx numbers, with 13% of the incoming class being Latinx. But our African American numbers, our Black African American numbers, were only about 5% of the incoming class. On the right side here, you'll see gender. And this looks almost split perfectly down the middle, and that's the case. It is absolutely not perfectly split by Rutgers school. Some schools tend to have significantly higher percentages of men or women, or vice versa. It really all comes down to what we look like overall when you add it all up. Compared to our Big Ten counterparts, most of them are actually a little bit more 55-45, with 55% of their incoming class be those who identify as women, 45% those who identify as men. So the fact that we're very evenly split, we're a little bit of an outlier with that. You know, many schools have moved a little bit more to those who identify as female.
I also just want to point out, though, at this time, the university really wasn't collecting too much information around non-binary students. And so that's not going to be included in this data, but as we continue to do these presentations and collect more data over the years, we're hoping to see that number grow as far as being reported.
So as I mentioned, Pell are students who are considered, some of the most low-income students, not only here in New Jersey, although most of our Pell recipients, as you can imagine, are New Jersey residents, but also throughout the country as well. For our incoming class, 26% of our incoming students were Pell recipients. And as we talk about, as we provide services, have to open centers to provide basic needs to students, part of the reason is because we are serving a high need community. It's truly part of what makes Rutgers great and why our Rutgers education truly changes lives. But over 1 out of every 4 of our students who entered in the fall 2020 first-year class was a Pell recipient. And we're going to learn a little bit more about them in just a second. So our first stat we want to look at, again, is retention. Okay, and now we're going to look at that by a number of different ways. Start by looking at ethnicity. All of these retention numbers, if you looked at these compared to national averages, dramatically above national averages. But we're concerned about how are we doing here at Rutgers and how this breaks out for us. And you'll see while every group has a very, what we'd say, a good retention rate, there are significant differences. For example, our Asian students had the highest first-year retention rate in the fall 2020 class at 96%, which is significantly higher than our Latinx students who are just under 90%. So you're seeing some differences here. What I want you to kind of take a look at is, if you kind of try to remember this, you'll see fairly evenly split. Our Black African American students were at 93.5%, white students at 92.28%. But again, Latinx was the one on this slide where you see a bit of a dip compared to the others. That's going to be interesting when we get a little bit further on in the presentation when we're looking at graduation rates and seeing how much of this holds true. Now, first-year retention. Are the males and females almost identical. Almost identical when it comes to first-year retention. Okay, remember that. Those who identify as female versus male, almost identical in first-year retention. That's all I want you to take away from this slide. If you look at them, they're almost exactly the same. Finally, those who are not Pell recipients, 94.2% retention rate. Pell recipients a little bit lower, still incredibly high. I don't ever want us to put us down for this because 91.4% for Pell recipients is incredibly high, but a bit lower. Good reminder that these students are often those who have to stop out, who have something happen with their family or their financial situation where they might want to come back, but something prevented them from. They're more likely when you're a Pell recipient based just on your socioeconomic situation. So that's just a little bit about our first-year retention. Turn things over to Will.
And regarding internship participation, we're actually able to take the admissions data for those students who entered in through fall 2020 and connect that to our post-graduation survey data. And as part of that survey, we actually asked students to report on some of the experiential learning activities that they participated in while here at Rutgers. And so let's take a look at some of the internship participation data broken down by those same groups. One of the things that you'll quickly notice is the uneven participation rates when we're looking at ethnicity, in particular with our international students. 41% of them reported having at least one internship while here at Rutgers during that time. We also know that international students have quite a few additional challenges that our domestic students do not have when it comes to internships, where they can intern, whether or not the employer is willing to accept their CPT, which all of them really should. But we also have some employers who are only able to hire U.S. citizens, whether it's based on contracts that they have with the federal government or other cases. But that's something that we continue to look at. The other thing about international students that we keep a keen eye on are things like, are they participating in on-campus employment, where they're not actually required to have CPT to participate. And so one of the things that we're doing within Career Exploration and Success and working with many of our campus partners, some of which I see here today, is looking at ways to university-wide add additional career readiness, competencies, and professionalism into the overall student employment program. So regardless of whether or not you can work on campus or off campus, you're picking up valuable skills that employers will look for post-graduation. But we're also seeing a lower participation rate of our Black and African American students compared to the rest of the population. And internships are critical because we have tons of data, multiple years of data, both locally but also nationally, that tell us that students who have internships are statistically significantly more likely to have post-graduation career success from the career outcome standpoint. And a lot of that has to do with this next slide. Still looking at internships based on ethnicity, the paid but also the full-time job conversion. The vast majority of our students who have an internship overall are telling us that at the end of that internship, it led to a full-time job offer. Even if they are going into their senior year, as an example, because again, we're looking at undergraduate data here. As they're going into their senior year, they had a great summer internship at an organization that they really want to work for. A lot of those students are receiving full-time job offers, even if they don't begin until the following summer after they graduate. Employers are really looking at internships as that onboarding pipeline for their students. It's almost like a training as you go type of deal. And so that's why this is really important. When you look at the paid internship experiences, for the most part, it's relatively stable across the board. But look at the Asian and Asian American students. 90% of them who stated that they had an internship also had at least one paid internship. Whereas, again, we look at our Black and African American students this year from this cohort, only 74% stated that that is the case. We do know that there's some disparities as well between paid and unpaid internships when it comes to the type of internships within particular industries a student wants to work in, and we don't make any value judgments based off of that. The real question is, are they able to afford to have access to the opportunities that they want to go into? And that's the real question. But then, of course, as you look at some of the students that have higher percentages of paid internships, you also tend to see higher percentages of those reporting full-time job offers post those experiences. One of the other things that we are trying to do with this particular question as well, especially as it relates to unpaid internships within the nonprofit area, as a university, we are committed to bridging the gap between students who want to work in these community-oriented organizations and this question around pay. So things like the Rutgers Scarlet Service internship program, as an example, is a way that the university actually pays about 135 students $5,000 to participate in nonprofit organizations over the summers from an internship standpoint. And again, this is really, really critical because we know that internship participation beyond just the job offer conversion rate is also great to help students develop the skills and the competencies that employers state that they're going to need in order to be successful in their post-graduation pursuits. Breaking it down by gender, again, very equal when it comes to male and female students, stating that they had at least one internship. But when you look at the paid internship experience, and you'll also notice this when we get to the full-time piece as well, there are disparities between the genders when it comes to paid and unpaid. And finally, when you're looking at Pell status, for our Pell eligible students, you'll notice that there is a significant difference between our Pell students when it comes to paid internships and unpaid internships. And that's something that we want to kind of keep an eye on and dig a little deeper to find out, well, why is that? For some of our Pell students, because they are supported financially here at the university, they might find that they don't necessarily need a paid internship. They might want to, for example, work in a nonprofit area that cannot pay or is legally unable to pay. We don't know. But it could also be a case that they also need to pay more. So the thing is, we just don't know what the answer to that question actually is, and we have to look a little further into it.
So we talked about retention rates, and we saw some differences there. Some groups doing better than others, certainly. Then we're going in, and again, same thing. Differences, though, and necessarily who is doing the best, and necessarily who might be a bit lower. Now let's see how that kind of plays into graduation rates, because I think, obviously, if you're not retained, you don't come back for year 2. It's really hard to get to year 4 into graduation. But also, if you're not participating in internships, if you're not moving through those, I think it also means that you're less likely to graduate maybe in 4 years as well. So how does this kind of hold up? If you remember from the retention slide, our Asian students had the highest first-year retention, and they have the highest 4-year graduation rate. That makes sense. Our group then, though, that was the lowest, as far as retention was our Latinx students. They're not the lowest here. Who is the lowest? It's our Black African American students, which were not nearly as low when it came to their retention rate. They were at 93%. But when it comes to the actual 4-year graduation, significantly lower. And that's just, again, things that you have to make sure you're seeing the whole picture and not just thinking about how students are doing in year 1. Will talked about that. It's a group that is participating less in internships. And now we're seeing that at the 4-year mark. And again, a lot of times graduation, we are looking actually 6 years out because, especially with the needy population, we know not every student's able to graduate in 4 years. We're obviously making a lot of strides and really focusing on trying to get students through here in 4 years, but just seeing that there are these differences. And again, just because there was success in year 1, is that necessarily translating all the way to year 4 into graduation? And Will's going to talk a little bit more about after graduation. The answer is not necessarily. If you remember, when we looked at our those identified as male versus female, almost exactly even when it came to first-year retention rate. When it comes to graduation rates, our females are graduating at a much higher rate in 4 years. Significantly higher, 73% versus just under 65%. That's a significant difference between those two groups. And again, they start out after year one, they're all, seem like they're doing basically the same, but our females happen to be graduating at a much higher rate. What does that mean for graduation and success things? We're going to learn about that in a second. But again, this is the first one where I think we start out the same and then suddenly see things very different. It's important to make sure we're taking a look at that. Finally, again, our Pell students were being retained at just a little bit lower rate than our non-Pell students. For your graduation, those numbers, again, they shift. Our students who are non-Pell graduating at, again, 73%, just under 62% for our Pell recipients. So again, as we get to that 4-year mark, what happens? Why are things shifting so much? If things were holding pretty true and pretty steady from year 1 to year 2, what's happening? What do these students need to continue to receive from us to get them to be a little bit more in line when we get to year 4?
And then looking at that career outcomes percentage, breaking it down by ethnicity, again, relatively stable across most of our ethnic groups here. The one exception, which we see every single year, is our international students who, again, have additional challenges to full-time employment. So if you recall from the internship slide and also from some of the data that we know, those internships tend to be very important predictors to post-graduation career outcome success. And so if you have a population that has lower internship participation, the chances that they will find full-time employment within 6 months is that much lower. And also for our international students too, they have to go through the visa process. While many of our students continue to use their OPT, and if they're in a tech field or going into a tech field or come from a tech academic program rather, they can utilize their optional practical training a little bit longer than our non-tech students. But for some of our employers, there's so many misnomers about what it means to hire an international student. Some of our employers do it extremely well. EY, also known as Ernst & Young, as an example, when they hire a student, an international student, into a full-time job, they not only assign them a special recruiter that can help them acclimate to the company, but they also assign them an immigration attorney to help them go through the process of acquiring their citizenship and their visa in many cases as well. When you're looking at gender, again, relatively even between our female and our male identifying students, which is always great to see. However, let's get to Pell first. Our Pell students actually have a slightly higher post-graduation career outcomes percentage than our non-Pell students. This year, we actually decided to combine the slides for average debt and salary to hopefully show you a fuller picture between the two comparisons. So from a salary standpoint, just so you know, we're focusing on the median starting salary, not the average. So we are taking out many of those heavy swings that we've seen in the past because of the averages. But when you're looking at median starting salary, for the most part, for our Asian American students, you're seeing $80,000. For the median starting salary. For our Black and African American students, you're seeing $76,000. But just based off of the way the slide is set up here, you do see a dip. What's actually surprising for many folks who look at this slide is that our white and Caucasian students actually have a lower median starting salary than our other student populations, with the exception of our Hispanic and Latino students.
And the highest average debt at the time of graduation. That's a big difference. Again, looking at the Asian students, you're seeing, that difference in $15,000 versus $25,000. How much longer it's going to take you to pay back your loans when you have $25,000 versus debt versus $15,000 worth of debts, especially when you're starting, salaries are so significantly different as well. Again, just showcasing that each group breaks a little bit differently when you look at it.
When you're breaking it down by gender, this slide is a continued trend that we're seeing between our female and our male identifying students. With our male identifying students having a larger median starting salary than our male students. And we've seen this for about 5 years now. If you go beyond this data, when you look at national trends regarding salary expectations, That's where you really start to see some disparities between our male and female identifying students. Even if going into the same fields, our female identifying students tend to have lower salary expectations going into the salary negotiation process. So many of our campus partners have been doing a great job, like our Douglas Bow Leadership Program. They actually have hosted in the past offer negotiation workshops for their students. Because again, if you're going into a negotiation expecting a lower salary and asking for less compared to your male counterparts, the employer is going to give you less.
And just make sure we take a moment to look at this and look at this difference, dramatic difference in average school debt. Remember, our females are graduating in 4 years at a significantly higher rate than their male counterparts, but they're getting a lower salary and on average have more than twice the amount of debt at the time of graduation. Lots of things to look into there. I don't know the answer to that. The question is going to be, why is that? I don't have that answer yet. This one was one where I think Will and I both looked at each other and were like, whoa, that's a number that kind of hits you out of nowhere. Because again, when we talk about average debt, it's a number we're generally just talking about the entire university. But you have to dive in a little bit deeper to start to see that there are these significant differences. And you're like, why are they graduating on time, not getting paid as much, and have twice as much debt? Well, how is that working out? So there's an answer in there. We got to kind of figure that out. But that was one of the most interesting things I'd say that came out of this study for us. Oh.
And when we look at our Pell status, again, relatively even, but there is a slight $3,000 difference between our Pell eligible students and our non-Pell eligible students. And of course, as Marco has also been pointing out, the average debt, considering our Pell students have additional resources that are focused on the fact that they are Pell eligible, helps to bring down their average debt. But still, we're looking at some potentially significant differences here.
Our Pell students, our Pell students, again, tend to be New Jersey students. If you're a Pell recipient, you're generally also going to be a recipient of the TAG grant, which is the New Jersey State grant. When you're getting Pell and TAG and the additional assistance you get from the university, those are the students who really get the most concrete and most comprehensive financial aid packages. Students who just miss out on Pell also are just missing out on TAG usually. And then even if they are getting aid from Rutgers, it's often, especially back then, before Scarlet Guarantee, these students were often missing a lot and having to take a lot more out on loans. So that's not overly surprising to see, just because our Pell students do tend to be packaged with the federal, with state aid and Rutgers aid. That really creates that better package for them. So observations, again, just kind of recapping some of what we talked about. When we look at our groups, while there are strong first-year retention rates overall, we are seeing, again, that our Latinx students, for whatever reason, are being retained at a lower rate. This is something that really lags behind all the other groups. Internship participation is another thing as well. Our four-year graduation rates, specifically for not only our Latinx students, but our Black African American students, are also lower compared to their counterparts. So that's just, when we take a look at the totality here and try to look at the groups across and see where the differences are, those are the main takeaways we would say, specifically to ethnicity.
From a gender perspective, there are some key strengths here. First and foremost, the first-year retention rates being relatively equal between the two genders. However, strong participation internship rates, relatively even, and positive career outcomes percentages are relatively equal based on that career outcomes definition. But there are certain things that we are continuing to keep an eye on. Again, the lower paid internship rates for our female students is an 11 percentage point gap there. For our male four-year graduation rates, this year it actually lags by about 8.3 percentage points. And then that whole debt to salary ratio, that imbalance for our female graduates. We're going to get this.
Yes.
Hold on. Got it?
You give two of us clickers at the same time, that's what happens. Again, looking at Pell students, strong career outcomes, but and then their balanced debt to salary. Again, we do like that while their salary might not be as high as the non-Pell, at least their debt is a bit lower. But certainly challenges when it comes to retention, when it comes to graduation, internship participation, some significant gaps there. Certainly work to be done. It's one of the things where I think there is great work we can do to support these students, but often their needs might go beyond what we can help. We just We have to do the best we can to support these students. Some things might be beyond our control. That doesn't mean there's not opportunities to support this group. Okay, now we're going to talk about grad. Again, I want to be very clear when it comes to graduate students, unfortunately, the amount of data that we have at our fingertips is a bit less than the undergraduate. So if you are someone who works exclusively with graduate students, we wanted to make sure we gave you something, so we gave you as much as we could here. But if you're looking at it and saying this isn't as comprehensive as at the undergraduate level, it's true. But there's only so much we can do because there's only so much data that we have, unfortunately, when it comes to graduate students. First, just want to kind of take, again, a look here. Again, significant difference at the undergraduate level. As I mentioned, we talked about this first-year students, very evenly split when it came to gender identity. At the graduate level, almost 2/3 of our incoming graduate students are those who identify as female. Small percentage being those non-binary, and about 35%, just under 35%, those who identify as male. Very different, very, very different than at the undergraduate level. Breakdown, again, when it comes to race and ethnicity, we see a significantly, or roughly the same percentage of white Caucasian students in this, but the other groups, there's certainly more diversity being seen, especially, we go from about 30% of our undergraduate incoming first-year students being Asian. In the graduate level, it's only about 11%. Also, international, you'll see here 20%, basically double what you saw at the undergraduate level, 20% of our graduate students here are international students. So again, just a little bit here about the diversity of the group. I want to turn it over to Will to talk about internships.
Yeah, this is where I step out of the boy band and become my own single singer here. We do have a lot of data when it comes to career outcomes. And again, that's thank you to many of our partners who share our surveys with their students when they're graduating. So from an internship standpoint, as you can imagine, overall internship participation rates are lower compared to the undergraduate level. For many of our graduate students, they have other fieldwork types of experiences that they're participating in outside of internships. But you'll see for the most part, relatively stable, except, again, when you get to our white and Caucasian students, it's a little bit surprising for some that they actually have a lower percentage participation rate when it comes to internship participation. When you're looking at this question of, again, a paid experience and full-time job offers, our international students at the graduate level actually have higher percentage rates of paid internship participation. Compare that to the undergraduate level that we talked about earlier for that population. And our Asian and Asian American students also have a pretty high participation rate at the graduate level compared to their other peers. When you're looking at the full-time job offers, in this particular case, international students actually have a higher full-time job offer conversion rate than their peers, unlike at the undergraduate level. And looking at gender, again, relatively solid between male-identifying and female-identifying students when it comes to reporting at least one internship that they participated in. But again, when you get to whether or not it was a paid experience or an unpaid experience, the difference between our male-identifying students and our female-identifying students is certainly significant. And that full-time job offer conversion rate also shows that as well. One of the things, too, I want to point out with this slide when it comes to paid experience, certainly it also depends on what types of employment opportunities our students are going into, whether it's more of a helping profession. As we know, unfortunately, the median starting salaries and also the internship pay rates are a lot lower. And that's typically what you will see across the board with a lot of our nonprofit organizations, because they do not have a lot of laws that require them to pay their interns. So many of them either can or choose not to for a variety of reasons. And then looking at that career outcomes percentage, again, the career outcomes percentage includes those who are employed, it includes those who were accepted into a program of continuing study, or they are volunteering or participating in military service. So at the graduate level, looking at the red bars, once again, you see relatively even post-graduation career outcomes rates with the exception of our international students for all the reasons that we spoke about at the undergraduate level. But you can also break it down too, which we will do in a future slide, in a couple of slides, where we're looking at the actual employment information versus the schooling information versus the volunteer and military information. When it comes to their preferred choice activity, though, again, relatively even with the one exception of this unknown other. I should also point out that unknown other, that N is relatively small compared to the rest of the ethnicities for all of our reporting. And looking at gender as far as, again, career outcomes percentages, Our female identifying students actually report a higher percentage when it comes to post-graduation career attainment compared to the male counterparts. But then when you get into the preferred activities, it's relatively even with 82 and 80% between the two. And median starting salary. Again, I told you this is my debut for my solo album. We have a lot of information regarding salary, median starting salaries, but again, you can see our international students, for those who actually acquire full-time employment, they have higher starting rates when they're looking at their peers with 80,000. And between gender, again, you do see that gender disparity when it comes to the median starting salaries at the graduate level, just like you did at the undergraduate level.
So, he let me back into the band for just a little bit longer. Wanted to talk about four-year graduation rates. Again, now we're just want to do a couple slides as we come to the end here. Again, we're going to open things up for questions just a second. But just, again, trying to tell the story and how things have changed over time. Four-year graduation rates, this is everything from our entering first-year class in fall 2015 through fall 2019. Now, you're saying to yourself, Marco, you just told us all these numbers about the fall 2020 class. The official OIR-approved four-year graduation rate has not been officially released, so I couldn't put that on the screen. Anyone in from OIR here? No? Okay, it's going to be like 68%. I can't put that on the screen. It's not on the slide or anything, but it's going to be 68%, which is great. This is all exciting stuff. Again, it's been very consistent. The thing I think I'm most excited about is if we're back here next year doing this again, is next year's class, the entry class of fall 2021. That was the first time we went test optional, and we'll have our first cohort of students and their first potential graduation rate. Now, I'm going to preface this for those of you who can't wait to come back next year to hear about this because you're so excited about this data already. It's the first cohort. We were definitely still finding our way, how we were going to manage the admissions process. These students were still going through COVID. There's still a lot going on, so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Nobody does. We'll find out later this year, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about that next year. But it's going to get exciting. I think it's going to be something to really kind of look at, see how that changes things, how that might change things when it comes to four-year graduation rates by ethnicity, by Pell percentage, by gender, lots of different things that it's going to be exciting to kind of look at with that big change. And every year, as we build into that, we're going to get to see how that goes. Also get to see, in a few years, six-year graduation rates, which again is another thing that's something that we're really excited to kind of look at because that's generally what we're judged on is our six-year graduation rate.
And from a career outcome standpoint, this is the slide I was referring to earlier where you can actually see the breakdown between employment, the continuing education, and the volunteer military service. But that blue bar, that first blue bar, will show you the trends. And we have had an upward trend. Last year, we actually hit our peak over a 12-year period. That was the first time that we hit 89% as an overall career outcomes percentage. But this particular year, which again is the class of 2024, and this is both at the undergrad and the graduate level, we are now down to 84%. But again, when you compare us to other institutions, Research One institutions, we tend to fare a little better than what you see across the nation. We haven't received the national data yet. We won't get that until the fall in order to compare. But it is a continued trend that we not only look at. But also you'll see this year, one of the other things that we notice is the slight uptick in the percentage of students who decided to continue their studies. So whether that's a grad program, a doctoral program, a certificate program, or whatnot, compared to previous years. And we continue to think that trend will continue to increase as long as the economy is doing what it does. This is right around when a lot of tech organizations were laying off employees and instituting hiring freezes. And for this year, for the students who graduated this past summer and who are still looking for jobs through the 6-month process, the federal government hiring freeze is already causing some challenges with potential post-graduation placement.
And now it's time for questions. Oh.
Thank you so much for that overview. You did a really great job of synthesizing a lot of data in an easy to follow format, so I wanted to commend you on that. My technical question is as we have more and more folks who identify with multiple races / ethnicities, I'm just curious how they're counted in these. So if you have, for instance, someone who identifies as Hispanic and white, like myself, where would I fall?
So, and I think that's an evolving conversation. As especially, for years, Asian was looped in together. Now we're trying to, provide more opportunities for that. Traditionally, if you identify as more than one race, it does go into this other category because we don't want to put you into one particular bucket and not another bucket. So the other category, I'm trying to remember, Will, the last time we had that on a slide, unknown other, that's where those students would fall. Again, as Will mentioned, the N tends to be smaller with that group. But I think, again, that's a group that I've seen at least trending. It is getting larger. Although it is still smaller numbers, they are getting larger over time.
And I should also say that from the post-graduation data that we provide, we use the labels that we receive from admissions and from the registrar's office, so they do match. Thank you.
Time for just one more question, so we'll finish here with you, Darnell.
Okay. Great information. I really appreciate that. My question is also in the same vein, right, in thinking about gender, right? And I know in our admission processes and things like that, there's not necessarily an ability for us to include or gather the data for our trans and non-binary folks, right, who are applying to our university. How are we able to kind of potentially use that? And I know that you're collecting this data longitudinally, right? And so, like, how are we able to kind of also be thoughtful, creative, whatever that strategy might look like, to collect that data around the success of our trans and non-binary students too as well?
Yeah, so unfortunately we couldn't go back and get that information, but now we do collect it. So on the application, it's, and there's a lot of reasons. First, we do ask for legal sex at birth, but then, we do ask gender identity, has different options, has another for, if you don't identify any of those listed there, you can type in however you identify. So in the future, we gotta go, I think it's 2022 or 2023 was the first year we reached that step. We'll be able to talk about that and have that considered. We're just, unfortunately, not there yet. But we're getting there, Darnell. We are getting there. It's just not there yet.
You'll notice on the slides, too, that we had, for graduate students, as an example, we can report on non-binary because we started to see some of that data come through because it's a smaller period of time that the data was being collected. But for our undergraduate students, we're just not quite there yet. But once they graduate, we will then have access.
So you got to keep coming to the session because there's cool things coming in the future.
So I thought we only had time for one question, but there was a very quick response there. And so I see pink and purple from you, Troy, and I really can't say no. So I'm going to go ahead, let you go ahead.
You can also join the band. I just want you to know you got the perfect colors on to join us up here on stage next time.
I planned it this way.
There we go.
So I'm interested, of course, in the intersection of race, ethnicity, gender, identity, and like Pell Grants and all these things. So can you analyze it at that level where you're breaking it down according to that? Because I suspect there'd be vastly different responses, right?
Absolutely. Some of the ends will get very small, and if we're going to do that, I think we'll probably have to look at multiple years data together. Otherwise, I mean, depending how specific you get, there might only be a handful of students who fall into a particular category. But can we get that granular? Yeah, and if that's something we want to look into, that's so much about Will and I talk about. Like when we are talking about this conversation, it's getting away from just looking at things in a blanket way. You have to drill down. If we talk about we want to get our four-year graduation rate up from 71% to 75%, well, you need to see where the gaps are, and you need to get really granular in what those look like. So what you're saying is exactly what we feel we need to be doing, and the more that people want us to dive into specific groups like that, we can do that. The only thing I say is sometimes the groups are really, really small, and then it's up. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
And I'll say the nice thing about this partnership as well is that they can pull students, provide us with the RUIDs, and then we can then pull that post-graduation survey data relatively easy at that point. It's just a matter of identifying the students that we want to pull data on, and we can make it happen.
All right, I do think this will be the actual last question. So please
Thank you for
talking faster than I thought you would.
Thank you for giving me a minute for it. Thank you so much for the presentation. Will, I think, mentioned some strategies to address like negotiation and things like that. I wonder how the data is used in admissions, especially the debt data, the inequities in time to graduation, how you activate and make policies around that.
These are the things we're talking about. I mean, so much. I mean, admissions, our job is to bring students. We want to bring the very best to come here. To do that, we need to convince them that a Rutgers education has value, that they're going to be able to graduate on time, although obviously many of the reasons they might not graduate on time go beyond what happens here at Rutgers. We have worked very closely with our friends in the Office of Financial Aid. They do a lot of programming called Scarlet Sense, which is about understanding financial aid packaging, understanding loans, understanding what it means to graduate with $10,000 versus debt versus $25,000 worth of debt. We look at it as though we have to educate people on what they're getting into. It's the honest part of what we do. Students choose to do what they're doing. We also have seen, in the last couple of years, an increase in our Pell students being out of state, which is a scary thing because we know they're not going to have the full funding, and often are students who need to take on more debt. So communicating to students about this, and if we don't do a good job of making sure students understand it, and we don't make sure that we're keeping the amount of debt as low as it possibly can be, then graduating from Rutgers means, oh, I have all this debt. That's going to get harder and harder to convince students Rutgers is the place for them. So it's absolutely something we're thinking about every day and working on. The good thing, as Will mentions, there's a lot of positives that we talk about, and the average starting salary is amazing, especially in so many of our programs. So we have to tell that complete story. But I think our work with financial aid really does address the whole graduate on time, you're going to have less debt. What does that mean? Because we talked about here about debt at 4 years. If you stay for a 5th year, that average amount of debt goes up. That's so much what we do. Plus, you're missing out on a year of income towards your future and all those different things. So yes, this is what we're doing, and it's so important, so critical.
Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you.